This episode of the Let's Talk Yoga podcast is brought to you by my upcoming online 300-hour yoga teacher training. Module 1 starts on April 2nd, and you can explore all the details at ahamyoga.com or just jump on to my mailing list. You can find the link anywhere where you connect with us. Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 35 of the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. I hope you're doing well. It's officially spring, and we've been having some amazing spring days up here in Seattle. It's been sunny and bright, not as warm yet, but definitely getting there. I hope to be out in the yard sometime soon, sharpening my honestly non-existent gardening skills. I also got vaccinated recently, so it's been really a fun few days of spring. On the back end, I'm gearing up for my upcoming yoga teacher training modules, but I've also been working on a special project for yoga teachers that I'm announcing here for the first time. I've been working towards creating a very special monthly mentorship online teachers support club. I get so many questions from yoga teachers like you on Instagram and on email on things relating to just the life of a yoga teacher. Often these are, the similar questions, if not the same questions from different people. And when I started this about 8 years ago, I asked myself so often, I just wish I could ask someone these questions and get answers. So if you're a yoga teacher looking for support to be mentored and you don't want to break the bank getting this support, then make sure you're on my email list. I'll be announcing all the details online soon of how this works and probably will be out by the time this episode drops. We essentially pick a topic every month for us to explore. You get to submit questions. You can request for topics to be discussed. You can ask for feedback. Honestly, you can even show up in this online monthly club and be like, what's next? I don't even know what happens next. There's no topic that's off the table, though I will have the topics laid out for every month so you know what we're getting into each month. So it's a safe space. It's an online mentorship club for yoga teachers. And I've spent way too much time being lost and lonely and confused on this journey. And I'm hoping the little that I've learned, I can share with you. It costs about $17 a month. So it's pretty cheap, 17. And you can come in for a month. But if you really want the longer term benefit of the program, then I would say staying longer is always helpful. Okay. It's cheaper than a yoga class drop-in. So make sure to get on my email list to get into this online mentorship club. Okay. And coming to today's show, I chat with Tracee Stanley. She's the author of a new book on Yoga Nidra called Radiant Rest. Tracee was introduced to the practice way back in 2001, and she immediately recognized the potential that this practice had, and it really made an impact on her life. She was a Hollywood film producer with a high-stress career, and all these practices that she reached out for, especially Yoga Nidra, started really rejuvenating her. And it kind of was her secret sauce. You'll hear her talk about it in today's episode. And since then, she's been on this journey of teaching Yoga Nidra, meditation, self-inquiry. She teaches teacher trainings and workshops all over the world. Her new book is a great read for all yoga teachers, especially if you're interested in Yoga Nidra. It's called Radiant Rest. There are many things I loved about this book, and I did not know about Tracee's work before I actually read this book. And the one thing that really resonated with me in this book was that she really brings Yoga Nidra into today's times, into modern era, for lack of a better word. And you'll notice there are moments in this book where she has a section dedicated to how to teach to people who have faced trauma in their life, how to bring this practice into existence if you are a busy householder. And she even offers different physical setups. Usually we think Yoga Nidra has to be done only in Shavasana. And there's so many moments where this book makes Yoga Nidra relevant to how we live today. So I would highly recommend you explore this book if Yoga Nidra is a practice that you are interested in. We also had Indu Arora earlier in the podcast talk about Yoga Nidra. Okay. So I'll make sure we link to that episode as well in the show notes. And Tracee just lays out this Yoga Nidra beautifully in this book. Okay. And I'm sure you'll get a lot out of this book as well as this interview. I know this has been a longer intro than usual, but just before I let you get to today's interview, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. It always means a lot when you do, and get on our mailing list for all the good stuff. Here's the show today with Tracee Stanley. Hi, my name is Arundhati, and you're listening to the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. I'm an ex-Bollywood dancer turned yoga and wellness educator. I've built a 6-figure business as an immigrant, woman of color yoga teacher with no business background, no handstands, pure instinct, and the free information found on Google. If you love doing yoga and you dream of teaching it someday, this podcast is for you. We go over everything from doing and teaching yoga to scaling a small business, living a modern yoga lifestyle, and so much more. You'll find interesting, fun, raw conversations along with some tips, tricks, strategies, and insights in this podcast. So grab your cup of chai and let's jump in. Hi, Tracee. Welcome to the show.
Hello, hello. Thank you so much for having me here, Arundhati. I really appreciate it.
I'm really excited to talk to you. I just finished reading your new book, Radiant Rest. It was actually a surprise to me. I was sharing with you just before we hit record. You know, that two of my yoga friends recommended that, you've got to connect with Tracee. And I opened this book not really knowing what to expect. I've been practicing Yoga Nidra for several years, and I've spoken to Indu Arora on the podcast about Yoga Nidra before, and it's a topic I'm really interested about. So I was like, let's see what this book has got to offer. And oh my gosh, Tracee, it is such a well-written book. It's filled with empathy, and you're really talking to the person reading the book. And I finished it. Usually I take breaks. I read a little bit but I finished it pretty quickly because it just drew me in. It's such a gift. Thank you for writing it. That's part one. And what I wanted to ask you is, how does it feel to finally put this out in the world?
Well, first of all, thank you so much. My eyes are tearing because you're one of the few people who's read the whole book and is giving me a reflection. And I'm receiving that reflection. So thank you so much for your words about it. And, it's interesting, you spend so much time with this book, thinking about it, creating it, crafting it. And for me, doing a lot of practices in nature and trying to translate what I was feeling into the pages and practicing Yoga Nidra and trying to translate what was happening into the pages. And, you have this sense of ownership that happens like, oh, this is my book that I'm writing. And at some point for me, it was like, no, this is not my book. This is actually a prayer that I'm sending out into the world and that I hope that it's going to be received. And so on the day of publishing, I actually did my own little fire ceremony where I burned a copy of the book as a release and an offering into the world, because I feel like it's not mine anymore, that everyone hopefully will be able to receive it. So it feels very free. It feels very exciting. I'm getting lots of messages from people about the practices that they're doing from the book and the experiences that they're having. So it feels like I'm getting to watch as an observer how the book is traveling as opposed to it being part of me, if that makes sense.
No, it actually makes a lot of sense. One of the things that was very special about your book for me was the fact that two things I really enjoyed. One was you brought Yoga Nidra out from, for lack of a better word, ancient times, and you made it very relevant as a practice, for our modern day and the life we live right now. And that's so important with yoga nowadays, right? To really bring these practices and make them accessible in a way to how we live. So that I really enjoyed, and it comes across in your book in so many moments where you share, student stories or all these different practice exercises and introspection that you ask, those prompts that you give us throughout the book. So it really comes across. I want to ask you, how did Yoga Nidra become such an integral part of your life?
Well, I was lucky to find Yoga Nidra in 2001. And I had been practicing yoga for about 6 years or 7 years at that point. And it was the deepest experience of bliss and profound stillness that I had ever experienced just in the first session. And at that time, it wasn't introduced as Yoga Nidra. It was really more introduced like a deep relaxation or guided kind of relaxation or even a visualization with Shavasana practice. But I started to seek out the practice. It became kind of my favorite thing to do. And at the time, I was an executive at a film company producing films. And I had a very hectic, very externally, kind of focused life working. And I found that the practice of deep relaxation and Yoga Nidra was actually helping me to stay more clear and to be more productive and to really just allow myself to thrive in a way that some of the people that I was working with, who are also working very long hours and had lots of projects that they were juggling, weren't quite able to thrive in the same way. So I think in the beginning, I was really using the practice more like a hack. It was kind of like my secret weapon that no one knew that I was doing this Yoga Nidra practice, and it was keeping me, able to really be radiant and clear. And then the more that I got to know about the practice, the more I got to read about the practice. And at that time, there were not very many books about Yoga Nidra. Then I started to realize that there's something else happening here that is really magical. And even though I was also teaching yoga at that time, what I started to notice is that my students were gravitating more to the practice of Yoga Nidra than they were to the Tantric Vinyasa classes or part of the class that I was teaching. They always wanted to know at the beginning of the class, are we going to do the deep relaxation today? No one was asking, are we going to do Mayurasana today? It's like, are we going to do Yoga Nidra? And so I started to craft my classes in a way where I was actually teaching less yoga asana and more space for Yoga Nidra, and then space for meditation and self-inquiry was being included. And so it was kind of like a third, a third, a third, and then some time for self-inquiry at the end. And I saw it not only transforming my life and my understanding of yoga, but also the desire to rest and just the transformative qualities of doing the practice consistently in my students and people who were coming to class. It was just a reflection. And so around 2004, I recorded some Yoga Nidra classes I put them on iTunes. And that was the thing that people wanted to do. They wanted to do Yoga Nidra. They wanted to rest. And it's been a journey ever since then.
I'm so glad that you're on this journey, so we get to benefit from this wonderful book and all the work you've put out. It reminds me of something you mentioned in the book, and I don't have the exact part of the book in front of me, but you spoke about how after coming out of the practice, you just have this feeling, this, and I'm just using my own words here, is this feeling of bliss. And it's so potent that sometimes it feels so alien on us, and we can't sit with it because we're like, oh my gosh, how do I feel like this? I don't even know if I'm making any sense to you right now, Tracee, but
Yes, you are.
we're so wired up, and you know this, right? We're so wired up that when we actually experience deep rest, it doesn't sit well with us sometimes because we're like, oh, wait a minute, what is this? So, anyway, there's no question to it. It just reminded me of that moment. You've said it beautifully in the book. I'm just not saying it as nicely.
No,
But
no, this is it's a really beautiful point that bears repeating because that space, that transitional space is something that holds the magic. It holds the memory of what happened in the practice. And so many times we get these like epiphanies. I mean, I'm sure anyone who's listening can think about a time where they were in a yoga class and some beautiful epiphany or insight came to them. And then by the time they got into their car, it was gone.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Happens all the time. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, and so I think part of the relationship that we can create with our practice is really learning to observe the transitions because that's where we can start to practice retention and processing and it allows the I feel like the flavor of the practice stays with us for much longer when we pay attention.
Mhm. To your point of building a relationship, right? What should be someone's intention when they want to practice yoga nidra?
That's such a great question because we have to think about in which way are we thinking about the practice of yoga nidra because generally we're thinking about yoga nidra as a technique of deep relaxation that leads us to this place of deep rest and deep awakening and is very close to samadhi and a portal to turiya, the fourth state. And then we can also think about that state. It's like, is the relationship that we're hoping to connect with the relationship with the state of Yoga Nidra? And then we can also think about Yoga Nidra as a goddess, as a manifestation of the Divine Mother. And so it's the question I always ask is which one am I interested in being in relationship with and why before I lay down and practice? And I think that informs what we do and what our intention is.
It was very fascinating for me to read in the book about, there's a big part in the book where you talk about the goddess of Yoga Nidra and the mother teacher. Can you talk a little more about this, Tracee? Because I think it's fascinating, and I'm sure the listeners would benefit from understanding a little more about the goddess of Yoga Nidra.
Yeah. So, I had been practicing for a pretty long time before I realized that there was a goddess, Yoga Nidra. And I had even been chanting the Devi Suktam. And that the part of the Suktam that is Ya Devi Sarvabhuteshu Nidra Rupena Samsita, I thought, and forgive my pronunciation, I'm not a Sanskrit scholar by any means, but that Nidra, I was always feeling like, oh, Nidra like the technique until a teacher by the name of Sri Devi Bringi said, oh, no, no, no. This is Nidra in the form of the goddess. And I was like, what? And so there are a few different stories about this time when Vishnu was sleeping on a cosmic ocean and he was in a kalpa, which, as I understand it, is this transition period of this place between creation and recreation. And that space was lasting for thousands and thousands of years. And out of his belly was growing this lotus, this stem. And on the lotus blossom was sitting Brahma. And Brahma, the creator, was meditating. And it was the perfect place to meditate because Vishnu is the preserver and the protector. But because he had been sleeping for so long, it was like Amma was starting to come out of his ears, and these two little demons were born out of the Amma, and they started attacking Brahma. And Brahma was like, "Okay, Vishnu, you need to wake up because I'm being attacked, and these demons want to take over the world." And Vishnu would not wake up because he was in a deep cosmic sleep. He was in a deep dreamless sleep. And so, after about 1,000 years of trying to wake up Vishnu, Brahma said, "Oh, I need to call on the goddess." And the goddess was the goddess Yoga Nidra. And he started to sing her praises about her moon-like beauty, her power, her radiance. And eventually she manifested herself. And she came and asked, well, what is it that you want? And he said, please, you've taken your seat as the power of sleep in Vishnu. Can you please wake him up so that we can conquer these demons? And she did. And in some of the stories, it actually says that she helped to confuse the demons with her power of sleep. So it made it easier for Vishnu to destroy them.
I remember reading this in your book. It's a beautiful story.
I love the story. And really one of the things that we can take away from the story is that even the gods are powerless without the power of Yoga Nidra. So when we think about Yoga Nidra in the way of this goddess who really can take her place within us and even support us and love us and nurture us unconditionally, I feel like whether we want to personify her or not, we can think about her as just being the earth itself, that it changes the practice. It changes it.
Absolutely. For someone who has not done Yoga Nidra, and I'm pretty sure, a lot of listeners have probably never done Yoga Nidra before. What exactly is happening during the practice? And I know this is like a huge question, but one of my goals is through this conversation and others is to tempt people to, in this context, try Yoga Nidra more, make it a part of their life and their practice. So what's happening in Yoga Nidra?
That's such a beautiful question. And I don't know that we're always going to get the same answer every time there's a research study done. But what I can definitely say is that for just the kind of, let's say, mechanics of the practice, is that the practice is generally done in a supine position. It's done in a position where the body can be really held and feel comfortable and supported. And so we have to also say that that's going to be different for everyone. So you find your own personalized version of what feels supportive so that your body feels like it can surrender. Generally, if you're being guided to systematically relax the body one by the toes, by the feet, the ankles, the calves, all the way up to the crown of the head. You're being guided to pay attention and be aware to the breath and almost feeling as though you're being breathed at some point and just watching the navel rise and fall. You're feeling kind of this diaphragmatic breath starting to happen. And in that diaphragmatic breathing, we start to activate parasympathetic nervous system, which is that rest and digest mode. And then the body starts to become a little bit heavier and a little bit more relaxed. And you may start to feel this feeling of dissolution because Yoga Nidra is a practice of Laya Yoga. It's a practice of dissolution. And that dissolution may take its form in you feeling like, oh, I can't really feel my body anymore. I'm actually feeling that I almost feel like energy and I feel more expanded. And then we get to continue to be guided to rest. And eventually we allow ourselves to let prana guide us back into source. And then we rest in spaciousness. And as we're doing that, we are moving through the limbs of yoga. We're moving through the awareness of vital energy and the expansion of that vital energy in the form of pranayama. And we are moving into this place where we take the senses inward. We take them from being outward and external to inward, and we allow that kind of movement inward to move us closer to our origin. And as we do that, we're continuing to maybe focus on a point, maybe if you're doing something like 61 points or 75 breaths. And then you start to move into this place of meditation and beyond. And it's said that the state of Yoga Nidra is like peace beyond words. And yet, at the same time, if we were hooked up to an EEG, we would start to notice that maybe when we first are getting ready and we're preparing our Yoga Nidra nest, that we're in a beta state, brainwave state, which is basically kind of like a relaxed, like maybe if you're listening to this podcast right now and you're in your bathtub listening to it, you're going to be in beta. You're listening to a lecture, you'll be in beta. And then when you start to close your eyes and bring your awareness inward, you're moving more into the alpha state. But you're still awake. You're still aware that there's stuff happening outside. If your dog starts barking, you're going to hear that. But your awareness has started to move inward. And then we start to move into these other states of theta, which is this deep relaxation state. And, there's been experiments that show that meditators and people practicing yoga nidra can pretty easily move into this state of theta. But it's when we drop into this state of delta, which generally means that all external awareness has been cut off and that we are in this deep, deep place of rest and sleep. And that if you were in delta, you really wouldn't be able to hear or remember if there was a conversation going on around you. But yet, these experiments that have been done have shown that yogis have had the EEG connected to them. They've been in delta state because they've been practicing deep dreamless sleep or yoga nidra. And yet they're able to recount full conversations that happened around them while they were in this state. So the body, the physical body, and the mind would suggest that they are asleep. But there is some part of their consciousness that is awake and aware. And that's really what yoga nidra is that we give our body and our mind permission to fall asleep. And yet the thread of awareness continues to weave through all the transitions of waking, dreaming, deep sleep, and moving towards that portal of Turiya and maybe beyond.
Thank you for that explanation. And for anyone listening, right? In Tracee's book, she goes into so much detail about all that she's talking about. Can we talk a little about, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this correctly, the hypnagogic state?
Yeah. So the hypnagogic state it's amazing because if we think about, well, first of all, the hypnagogic state is this transitional state between wakefulness and sleep. It's a place where the body drops into this deep relaxed state. And maybe there's going to be some muscle jerks or some even hallucinations. And anybody who's ever maybe been in a lecture or you've been driving and you kind of nod off, that there's that like moment where you realize that, oh, wait, I'm about to fall asleep, and you wake yourself back up. And sometimes if we're about to take a nap, you feel that it's almost like this blissful moment. It's this liminal space. That's really the space that we become awake to and that we sustain in yoga nidra. And so the hypnagogic state, it's a transition and it's also a void. And so it's interesting, first of all, to think about the story of Vishnu being in this transition space of the kalpa, because it's very similar. I think they're very similar. And then at the same time, the word nidra, as I've heard it defined, is that the ni refers to void and the dru refers to draw forth from. And so that void is the transition between the states, and that is the hypnagogic and the hypnopompic state, which the hypnopompic is when you're coming from sleep back into waking.
Which kind of happens at the end of the practice.
Exactly.
It's beautiful the way you explain it. And I think on a lighter note, right? Sometimes we keep saying, yoga nidra, yogic sleep. And that kind of takes away from this other meaning of it being, you draw from it. So yeah, it's interesting. I wanted to ask you, because, you were talking about how we go deeper into the stages of yoga and from pranayama, a little more of pratyahara and deeper. What about someone who has a history of trauma and lying on the floor, eyes closed? It's a very difficult position. How do they practice yoga nidra?
I'm so glad that you asked that question because it was really important for me to address this in the book because so many times, I mean, I've been in classes where there's been hundreds of people practicing yoga nidra and the command has been given to relax. And so we don't really know what relax means to everybody. And so as teachers, and also as students, we need to take that into consideration because sometimes we don't even know until we are asked to surrender or to let go. And so what I recommend is that we have to be aware that there are other ways to practice. So there are ways to practice yoga nidra where you could be sitting up against a wall with your eyes open facing the door. And instead of having eyes closed and visualizing the points, you can have eyes open and you can actually be touching the points of the body that you want to relax. And you can still get great benefit out of the practice. We have practices that we do in our trainings where we basically create these kind of energetic circles of protection around the body. And that seems to be very helpful for people to be able to create a boundary for themselves. And also giving people permission that a lot of times in yoga, we feel like, well, if the teacher says do this, that's what we have to do. And I don't know how many people have probably gotten injured because someone has said go deeper and we've gone deeper. In the old school yoga nidra practices that I used to do back in the day, we were asked to remain perfectly still in the yoga nidra practice. That could be very traumatizing for someone who has a history of freezing or have been told to remain still for some reason. So I like to, give permission to move and adjust if you need to, and to come out of the practice and sit up if something becomes too uncomfortable. To be able to share with the teacher if you're in a real, physical class that maybe you don't feel comfortable in a lineup, maybe you feel more comfortable in a different spot in the room. And so I think that we really have to be able to have some agency for ourselves and give agency for our students to be able to know that they can speak up, because a lot of times I feel like people don't want to share anything, even that they feel uncomfortable about something. And so for me, those are the main things. I mean, obviously working with students that are suffering from severe PTSD or trauma, I personally feel like those are one-on-one kind of practices as opposed to group practices, and or studying with people who are skilled at yoga nidra and trauma informed yoga, I think is really important.
Mhm. It's one of those things, again, that I said earlier, it stood out in your book for me because Radiant Rest actually brings out yoga nidra from the old school of practice, at least from my limited exposure, and makes it so relevant and applicable in different scenarios. It even reminds me of how you call it the 5 different nests, different positions that we can do yoga nidra in, from some restorative poses to sitting up. And it was very refreshing for me because I was also taught the old school way of, lie on your back, lie still, you don't move in this practice, and it can be challenging. So I really, really like how you have made this practice so relevant and accessible. That brings me to another favorite part of my book. I might have said that several times already. This was my favorite part. Now, this is my favorite part. You talk about the householder's flow. And that was just such a beautiful moment in the book because I always think, right, with modern yoga, we have to make it relevant to how we live. And you talk beautifully about the householder's flow and how to bring this practice in. Can you share a little bit?
Yeah. So the householders flow really came forward because of all the students that I've been teaching and working with. There's not one that is living in a cave.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And so, including myself. And so it really started with how I was able to bring the practice in to my own life and then eventually to my work. And then eventually it kind of spread into everything that I was doing. My life became a practice. And those were the things that I really wanted other people to be able to experience, because a lot of the feedback that I would get was, I don't have time. I don't have time to do a 40-day practice. I don't have time even to do, a 40-minute yoga nidra practice every day. And so I really, in thinking about kind of the four stages of life, and that most of the people that I knew were in the stage of life that they were in the householder, I really just wanted to give some tips on how to weave practice throughout the day from morning until night, which included practices that help to observe the hypnagogic and the hypnopompic states. So in the book, there are wake up rituals and there are bedtime rituals. And if those are the only things that you can do, you're still weaving the practice through a 24-hour cycle of your day. But I encourage people to find little 2-minute or 3-minute increments where they can practice alternate nostril breathing, where they can practice observing the change of light when the sun is rising or the sun is setting, because those are all transitions, right? Those are all little mini kalpas. They're all little mini voids or little yoga nidras throughout the day, as Swami Veda Bharati used to teach. And so it's very, I believe that when we reframe what a practice looks like and we stop kind of buying into the commodification of yoga as a product that can be done and accomplished in an hour and a half or in an hour, then we get to really say, okay, I'm reclaiming this practice for myself. And how does it fit into my life in a way that's sustainable? And then just allowing that to be your practice. So I give a bunch of different ideas for people and how they can start to work with this. And I know from people who've incorporated these principles, they have seen a huge shift in their life and also a huge shift in their family's life if they are living with other people, because it just starts to infuse into everything that you do.
Absolutely. I like how you said, my life became a practice. That's so powerful. And you just said it in passing, but it really jumped out at me. Throughout the book, I noticed you said 40-day practice cycle, whenever possible, 40-day practice cycle. Is there a significance to this 40 days?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. When I first heard that 40-day sadhana was way back, way, way, way back when I used to practice Kundalini yoga in the 90s. And I just thought, oh, this is this 40 days. This is just what it is. And then later I started to read about neuroscience and that it takes anywhere between 21 and 60 days to change the neural pathways in the brain. And so that actually means that it takes between those 21 and 60 days to be able to change a habit, to change part of your personality, to infuse something new within you. And 40 days spiritually has always been kind of the number that I've been given by my teachers to really be able to embody a practice, to see the changes that happen from day 1 to day 40. And so that's why the 40-day sadhana. And it's interesting because I received a new kind of understanding of the word sadhana, because a lot of times it's defined as like this committed practice that's done consistently over time in an unbroken way. And I recently heard from one of my teachers, Gary Krafsow. He talked about sadhana as being something that also leads you from the most gross to the most subtle. And I really loved that because I feel like all of those habits and those thoughts and everything that we have that holds us down is so gross and so material. It feels heavy. But the more that we do a practice consistently, especially the same practice every day, that you leave that practice and you feel lighter, you feel freer, you feel more radiant. So I love 40-day sadhanas. Can't get enough of those.
Beautiful. I also think it's important to do these so we've hardened in many ways, so it softens us the more we keep going from, gross to subtle practices. It's a way of softening. Now, as we slowly wind down, Tracee, I have one final question for you. Okay. But before we get to that, is there anything else that you want to say before we wrap up?
No, I mean, the only thing that I would say is that feeling and being rested is your birthright, as is awakening to your true nature. And Yoga Nidra provides the opportunity for both of those things to happen. So if you're curious about Yoga Nidra, I would say explore and have an experience with a practice, either through a recording or through a teacher, and just see how you feel afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. In your book, and I saved this question for last because it's really fun and I think it'll give the listeners something to do right away as they listen to this episode. You talk about how to set a mental alarm clock. And I read it twice because I'm like, I'm going to try it. I forgot last night to try it, to be honest, but I I've put a reminder to try it today. Can you teach us how to set a mental alarm clock?
Yeah. So mental alarm clock is really beautiful because it connects you to that part of yourself that is always awake. And so one thing I will say before giving the instruction is that it's not a competition. So you have to really approach it with a spirit of surrender and curiosity. And basically it's very simple. Once you're in bed, you decide what time it is that you want to get up. So let's say you want to get up at 7 a.m. You close your eyes and you visualize an analog clock. So you know at this time what time it is right now. So let's say it's 10 p.m. You visualize 10 p.m. on this analog clock. And you also then visualize the hands of the clock moving all the way around to the time that you want to wake up. And then you go to sleep and see what happens. You will wake up at the time or maybe 1 minute before the time that you're supposed to wake up. And if you have a tendency to have insomnia, you might not want to practice this one. But you also, and it gives you a lot of information about yourself. Because there's people who do the practice and they're like, oh my God, I woke up like 1 minute before 7 o'clock. And there's some people who are like, I really wanted to get it right. So I kept waking up in the middle of the night and looking at the time. And so it gives you a window into so much about what's going on with you.
Mm-hmm. I can't wait to try it.
Please let me know how it goes.
I will. I was like, oh, this is fun. I mean, but I know I'm ending on this note, but there's so much more in your book, Tracee. It is such a gift to the world. I will absolutely link to where people can order the book, where they can connect with you. But thank you so much for writing this amazing book. It really brings Yoga Nidra into modern life. It makes it so much more accessible. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me here. It's been such an honor to be with you today.
Thank you, Tracee. Thanks for tuning in. As always, please remember to leave a review, a rating, and subscribe to the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. If you are interested in getting on my monthly mentorship online club, then get on our email list. You can find the links anywhere you're listening to this episode. And as always, thank you, take care, and I'll see you next week.